Hey there, I'm Andrew. You're watching That Gamer Ajax, and we have a very special guest on the channel today. This is the Literary DM. We've been YouTube buddies for a couple years now. We got our start around the same time. He is the Dungeon Master for the ongoing Winds of Calamity, a Legend of Zelda inspired Dungeons and Dragons campaign that's been going on for a little over a year now. So if you want something to binge and catch up on, go watch it. It's very, very good. But along with being an active dungeon master, Lit gives a lot of great advice through other YouTube videos. We'll make sure that there is a link to his channel in the description, and I'll have it in a pinned comment. And lately, you've also been focusing a lot on like Pathfinder and Legend of Zelda lore. So if you like things that are tabletop, you want good advice pieces, or you just want to hear a lot of really fun stories, this is the person that you want to be watching. So welcome. Let's just go ahead and dive right into this. Tell me
Yeah.
how did you get your start in the world of tabletop gaming? How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing it since college. But I was always aware of D&D basically for as long as I remember. Like, remember being introduced to D&D through like the Dexter's Lab episode where they were playing it. That's why I introduced the concept of it. I was loosely aware of it. I knew about the Baldur's Gate games basically through name, seeing a little snippet of it when you go over to a friend's house. Back in those days, when you go over to a friend's house to play games, and read some elements of the lore. Got confused by all these weird names like L'Ariel Silverhand, and basically just gave up and then tried to read on things of like warrior classes for like fourth edition, because that was around the time fourth edition was happening. Got confused, but knew there was something cool here. And then in college, uh, I met a guy who I'm still dear friends with. We still keep up on a regular basis, and I shoot off various DMing ideas to him because he's been in the game longer than I have. Uh, and I made mentions like, "Oh, I'd be interested in trying a D&D campaign." And I love this question because this will be poignant for the rest of the thing. Because a few weeks later, he came to me and said, "Hey Fisk, I'm going to be starting up a Legend of Zelda inspired D&D campaign. Do you want to join?" He knew my love of Zelda, and I basically, without skipping a beat, said yes. So I started out playing as a Hylian fighter dual wielder. He was a guard. He had no perception, as a joke to the Ocarina of Time guards having zero perception.
And then
And
you could
this,
literally just like walk right behind them. It's like,
yes,
oh yeah, yeah, nothing's happening. This child is not sneaking up on me or anything.
absolutely. And this was back in Pathfinder First Edition, which borrowed from 3.5. So I didn't have like any ranks. So basically, a kind of sort of equivalent to 5e's proficiency system. Uh, no ranks in it. I had a 10 wisdom, which basically meant I was kneecapping myself from ever being useful to see anything. But it was a blast. I was committed to the bit. And from there, it basically was just the rest is history. I do remember elements of that party, though. We had a Kokiri, which are basically childlike beings from the forest, who was a druid. He rode on a giant tree and had a bunch of animal companions because 3.5, you always had a lot of animal companions for druids. Um, there was a Hylian ranger, a Zora, so a fish person wizard, and then a Gerudo who was a Magus, basically an arcane fighter type, and he was great. I remember his name because his name was Aaron, uh, and I remember that because that player always used the name Aaron for every single one of his PCs.
Well, at least it's very easy to remember all of them then.
Yep.
Okay, so clearly you do have a love for Legend of Zelda and tabletop, and I just love the fact that you've been able to mash these together for a long running game. I mean, you told me you just passed your year mark in January, but the main reason that I wanted to talk to you is that like clearly you have spent a lot of time and converting the world of Legend of Zelda into a D&D game. And I know that like okay, look, first of all, viewer, if you have a favorite media, steal from it. Like straight up steal from it,
Mhm.
because if you are having fun as a dungeon master or a game master, your players are going to like be able to feel off of that. And then sometimes you can put like the smallest little Easter eggs and stuff, and like if your players get it, then you can give them bonus points for it. But
Absolutely.
I want to talk to you a little bit about when it comes to like being that dungeon master and some of the logistics that are involved with converting the world of Legend of Zelda into something that you can play using Dungeons and Dragons rules.
Mhm.
Like, so what was the process like for you? How did you get your start with that? Like, how
Mhm.
much work did you put into converting something that you might see in Breath of the Wild into the world
Right.
and the rules of Dungeons and Dragons?
Right. Well, this is not the first conversion I've done for Zelda to a D&D like game. The first time I did it was the first time I ever tried to GM Pathfinder. I started with Edge of the Empire as my GMing career, and then I immediately jumped to Pathfinder, where I've been playing it for a few years. Like I know what I'm doing. It was the most broken homebrew you could possibly imagine. It'd be right at home on D&D Wiki, and uh, then a few years later, I tried it again with Breath of the Wild, and I converted again to Pathfinder First Edition because that's what I was still playing, and that was still out at the time. I hadn't made the full jump to 5e just yet. Uh, and first playthrough, I loved it. The second playthrough for Breath of the Wild was literally running around the world and just doing research, taking as many notes through dialogue, through uh, scenery clues and things like that to figure out what abilities they would have, and potentially even like resistances or vulnerabilities. There is actual dialogue in Breath of the Wild that indicates that Zora are weak to lightning. So Pathfinder, that was would have been electricity damage. So they were I forgot what I gave them. I gave them some form of vulnerability, or they took extra damage from lightning. And then from there, that game was a lot of fun. Still one of my personal favorite homebrews I've done. Uh, and then when I started up this campaign, I basically took the notes that I already had for that, which that took me about a year to do for Pathfinder 1E to really fine tune it. This one, I took all those notes there because 3.5 and 5e have a very similar DNA. 5e is much more streamlined. And since Pathfinder 1e shares a lot with 3.5, it was a much easier process to convert things over from there, but still expand on it a bit. Because 5e had the idea of where there were basic heritages, if you will. So, like with dwarves and elves. So, expanding on that, where a Sheikah, you could be a Yiga and you get certain bonuses. I think I did that with Zora, where they could be either from the Great Bay area, uh, or Zora's Domain, and they got certain bonuses there. And then Goron's, so on and so forth. So it was a long process. And even with that, that took a couple of months. I started that in March of 2021. And I think I handed that over to my players when we started to get this thing going around August of that same year.
Okay.
So again, converting over because I wanted to really fine tune things to make sure things are good to go and introduce a new ancestry that I wanted to bring in was the Twilight because I like the Twilight. The Twilight are cool. And I had to do a lot of hand waving for that because for those who played Twilight Princess, you know, technically Twilight shouldn't exist in the light world because technically they would die via the lore. And also, the Twilight Mirror Twilight is shattered. So I had to explain things in lore as to how that happened. But yeah, so that took about a year. Since this was my third attempt, probably about a year and a half total. And I'm still tweaking some things behind the scenes, working with players. Because as with every playtest, you know, things on paper sound really cool, and then you get them to the table, and sometimes, oh, that's rather broken. Some of the Twilight abilities verge on being broken, but are not quite there yet. The players have certainly found a lot of fun ways to use, specifically Avum has found a lot of fun ways to use his meld with shadow ability.
Yeah, yeah. Now, but the thing though is also like just something that like as a game master, if it is broken but everybody is having a good time,
Yeah,
then it doesn't matter.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah. So something that I'm curious about was, did you use any kind of like creature stat blocks that you might find in like the monster manual or the player's handbook to use as kind of like your starting point, and then you tweak them a little bit, or did you do a lot of this kind of from the ground up based on your overall experience with tabletop?
Right. From my experience, you can if you're gonna do ground up, you definitely can do it. It's gonna be a lot harder. So my motto is always work smarter, not harder. So I figured, okay, there's a framework here. Where can we start here and then adjust? So Chica's started with like the half elves ability because that seemed to fit their vibe a lot. Hylians started with as the human stat block. Zora was elves, and then I just went from there. Rito was, since they're birds, I went with Aarakocras.
Okay.
Uh, and I just basically expanded from there. Tweaked where it was necessary, brought in certain abilities, and or removed some that didn't seem to fit with what the games presented. So Sheikah have a lot of stealth-based abilities because they're in the games, they're a very stealth based people. They're meant to be hiding in the shadows, silently watching over the Hyrulean royal family. So they tend to have a lot of stealth abilities. I think I gave them like pass without trace as a once a day ability at some point. So yeah.
Okay. Main reason I'm asking that question is because so like if you are looking at this and
Mhm.
you are wanting to do your like take from your favorite media and put it into your tabletop game, you don't have to do like working extensively from the ground up.
Right.
Just remember, like there can be a template that's there, and people like you can have the ability to tweak things. I know that like I take so much from like my favorite books.
Oh yeah.
With the Veil of the Void campaign that I just recently wrapped up, like the Murderbot Diaries. If you haven't read those books, they're short sci-fi novels. There's a character I absolutely loved in that. I'm like, I'm gonna grab this character and throw them into my campaign, and nobody's gonna know because it's just like obscure little novella series.
Yeah.
But you can plug and play, but at the same time, like how did you find some of the inspiration for like creating like creatures? So like
Yeah.
let's use, I'm gonna go very basic here and we'll use like
Yes.
Skulltella for example, right? They they, they,
Yes.
they are very iconic in the Legend of Zelda series. Like how do you make something like that? How do you present that to your players and make it so way it's still like a fun combat encounter for them?
Right. So Skulltulas are definitely a fun enemy to use. I don't use them that much in this campaign because one of our players does have arachnophobia, so try to be respectful to that.
Of course.
But generally, I would take like a stat block for a large spider, for instance, and because that's basically what they are in Zelda is they are large spiders. The difference is especially in Ocarina of Time, and just like with every Zelda installment, they slightly vary. They typically have an armored front and they are more vulnerable on the back. So it's one of those cases of for that, uh, it would take damage normally on the front or have like a resistance. However, if the players manage to get to its back, then it would take damage normally. So they can either try to figure out a way to spin it to where the back is vulnerable or to where they can try to get around it. And naturally throw in like webs because there are webs whenever there are Skulltulas. The first dungeon, Ocarina of Time, with the Great Deku Tree, there are webs everywhere.
Hmm.
And then that creates difficult terrain where they have to move through. So using terrain and then abilities like that can really just help players think around the combat. Uh, and naturally, great early level enemies. Uh, Obviously, one of the players went down during that fight, and that was a fun experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a fun experience and led to some really good moments with the twins. So
Okay. Okay. So I know that like you said that you took a lot of time to work on setting things up for this campaign, making enemies, making things that way you could like reflavor it from the fantasy world of Dungeons and Dragons that we know to the more familiar Legend of
mhm.
Zelda for some people. Do you have any general tips for people that are wanting to take like bits and pieces from their favorite media, and like how can you look at this and how to convert that into a tabletop sense? Like
Yeah.
how do you see something like in a video game, be like, I want to make a stat block out of that?
Yeah. So one of the biggest tips I'll always say is that some things just cannot be translated well to the table. What works in a video game may not necessarily work at a table. So a classic example, so we're going to pull from Breath of the Wild, is weapon degrading. Uh, it it can definitely work at a tabletop if you do it right, but but it's one that's going to need a lot of tweaking because if the players don't like it in a video game, odds on favor is they're not going to like it at the table because that was one of the biggest gripes for Breath of the Wild.
Mm-hmm.
If a weapon is rusted, that kind of makes sense. But as far as taking like a monster and then transferring it, it's just looking at okay, what works in the game, and then trying to figure out basically knowing the system well enough to figure out how you can at least translate that to a table to make it still a fun experience, but not a one shot fits all. So, like Zelda enemies, if you go for the eye, you're more than likely going to win all the time. That doesn't make for an interesting tabletop combat encounter. So, to keep that, perhaps the eye will result in a vulnerability so they can bypass any resistances it may have, maybe even be vulnerable to damage, so the damage is doubled. Now the party has the choice. They can attack it normally or incur a penalty to go for a called shot. And if they with the added benefit of it doing more damage, so now they have an added layer of thought to the combat and how they're going to attack the creature. And that's just general combat encounter design tip, is trying to think of interesting ways to make it just how you can take a video game logic, adapt it to the table, and becomes way more interesting than just I just hit again. Now you can do where do I hit, and there's an added benefit of you hit in a specific area.
Okay.
Guardians are a great example of that, where they do damage, but if you hit them in the eye, it can do a slight stun. So for that, I would do like a Constitution save on the Guardian's part to see if they even get stunned. And that can even exchange to a certain damage type of them getting stunned.
Okay.
So
Along with Legend of Zelda, do you have
yeah.
like other pieces of media that you have like pulled from or like converted into a tabletop sense?
Oh, absolutely. In case you couldn't tell, back there, I am a massive Lord of the Rings fan. Uh, so I have converted uh, either encounter ideas where, one of the early campaigns, party basically just did the troll encounter in The Hobbit.
Ooh,
Uh,
okay, okay.
and the party 100% knew what this was. They did not care because they're just like, oh, we know what this encounter is. We're going to have some fun with this. And they just went completely off the chain with it, had so much fun. There's another time where it felt very Moria esque because they were going into Gauntlgrim for Forgotten Realms, which, I mean, if we're going to equate any bit of Moria to Forgotten Realms, it'd probably be Gauntlgrim, which is basically a dwarven mine. There's even a ancient primordial down it locked away in the the chambers of this place. Like instead of orcs, it's drow that hunt the place. It's very
Okay.
Moria. It's very Moria esque, and so that's basically what I did. And the party had an absolute blast, like including them having to run around on stairs and try to fight drow, but also avoid pieces come crumbling down. They knew 100% it was Moria. Again, they didn't care because the Moria sequence, movie or book, is one of the most exciting moments in the entire trilogy. It's one of my favorite moments. So they had a love for it. I did an element regarding like Paladin getting a sword, which was very similar to Aragorn and all that, because again, another player really loved Aragorn and it was his first time. So I wanted to give him that little bit of a moment of
Okay.
letting him live out something that he always wanted to do like ever since he was a kid. So, um, things like that. And also, I knew he was a big he loved Lord of the Rings: The Third Age video game. So I would try to describe some of his attacks looking like the attacks from that game.
You just unlocked a whole memory
Dude,
from it. Like I always forget that that game even existed in the first place.
it hasn't combat wise, it's fun. Dialogue wise, it hasn't aged well.
I will keep that in mind if I ever revisit it.
It offers a ton of laughs.
Okay, so we've talked about like some of the mechanics behind converting like your favorite media into a
Mhm.
tabletop scene. And also just a general tip that I would always throw out is that like if you need to tweak things, just talk like let your players know like, hey, this was something that I wanted to do, didn't work the way that I wanted. Take that
Yep.
feedback. But I was just wondering if we could also talk a little bit about like what are some of the joys of being like a game master and getting to run a tabletop game like set in like one of your favorite
Oh.
settings or getting to include some of your favorite pieces of media that you get to share with your
Mhm.
players.
Well, one, just be able to always include bits of media that you want, even as an Easter egg for you. It's a way to keep the enjoyment of the game going because sometimes as a DM, it can just get really tiring and you're trying to find inspiration. Just throwing in something like that, even if it's just for you, is a way to keep things fresh and almost have like a sense of play to it. Uh, I think one of the designs for one of Gary Gygax's later dungeons actually has his initials in the dungeon, and it doesn't do anything. It's just a simple form of play, and it's great. But as far as the joys, it's just really fun, and it's a chance to pay homage to a series that you may really love. That's what Winds of Calamity is. It's a series. Zelda is a series that has always had a actually had a really big impact on me as a person and also my view of fantasy, storytelling, and gaming. So Winds of Calamity is just a love letter to this franchise, and that's one of the things that I love about doing this game. Uh, and also, you can get a chance to get people who may be also big fans of it. And then when they're at the table, Mark is endless example of this because he is also a big Zelda fan. Uh, is when you throw out those small Easter eggs that may not have any bearing on the story, they are able to catch it. And just to see their face light up with excitement, and even at times with like live chat or the comments of people just going full on Captain America with "I understood that reference," is it's fun. It brings a smile to my face, and it's absolute delight. And it's able to keep things going because it's clear people are enjoying the story. They love the references, uh, and it's also just fun to have that opportunity to share something that may mean something a lot to you and share that with people at the table who may not even know anything about it or even care, but because you love it, you're going to put so much time and effort into it to make it the best thing possible that it's going to show at the table. And as you said at the very beginning, it's going to show people are going to love it as well, and they're going to get invested in it because you are invested, and that's just becomes very uh, contagious, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know we've referred to Winds of Calamity a
Mhm.
few times. I know you've mentioned like parts from the campaign,
Yeah.
but for anybody that has stuck around this long, since we didn't address it earlier, what is Winds of Calamity?
That's a fair
I know that
point.
I know that we've talked that it is a Legend of Zelda inspired
Mhm.
campaign, but what is the setting of it? Why do you think people should watch it? Which I'm gonna say you should. Like you should absolutely watch it. It is a great actual play. But give us that elevator pitch. What is
Yeah.
it?
So it is a game that is set in the world of Legend of Zelda. It takes all of the games that have been basically officially canon to the franchise and uses them as a springboard for telling this story. So Majora's Mask, Oracle of Ages, Oracle of Seasons, all that is canon. And it's a way to explore this vast world that Nintendo has made and to just experience it in a tabletop fashion. Uh, that's basically what it is, as well as elements of my own homebrew to make these games work together in this world. And but above that, there is also just this story that's happening with these with the players. There's especially once you get deeper into the it starts out very lighthearted, like a lot of Zelda games do. But eventually, as the game goes forward, we really start to dive into these characters and get into them. Uh, and there's just almost with all there's this element that's very human to them, especially as the players begin to figure them out. Uh, we're in a current arc with Sisri, and she's really starting to come into her own now, and it's great to see. So you get these very human emotions, and with characters like Adek realizing things about him, Aaron especially, and then Avum and Sisri being twins who bicker a lot but love each other, and having to figure out almost a way of how to communicate with each other. A lot of it is just very relatable, very human, all set in the backdrop of this, at times, very silly world that Nintendo has made. But there's this very human element to it that makes it very fun to explore with these grandiose stories that can happen.
Okay. All right, so I think we are going to go ahead and we are going to wind down this interview. First, I just really want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I know I know we've been YouTube buddies. We've managed to play in one game together. I'm really hoping that we'll be able to play together again sometime soon. But let's I think it's time for that the shameless self promotion. So where can people find you on the internet? Where can they witness all of your things?
I love that. Yes, so I am Literary DM. You can really find me on YouTube. There we stream Winds of Calamity pretty much weekly, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Central. I also make various YouTube videos that come out every 2 weeks. From there, release shorts every so often. You can also find me on TikTok at DM Literary. The same thing is with Twitter, DM Literary, and then also on Instagram. Also, if YouTube is not your thing for actual plays, we do have podcasts available on Spotify, Google, Amazon, Apple, basically anywhere podcasts are available at this point. So, yeah.
Okay. And as I mentioned at the beginning, all of those we'll make sure that, there are links in the description. But Lit, it has been an absolute pleasure having you. It also, we're trying to get you to that 1,000 subscriber mark.
Yeah.
You're getting there. I know you're getting there, but let's see if this can help a little bit. So people, if you follow me, you really should be following Lit. There is a wealth of great advice and great content on there. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. But
yeah, no, thanks for having me, man.
Of course. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. But thank you so much for watching. If you like what you've seen here, give it that thumbs up. Consider subscribing to my channel. Definitely subscribe to Lit's. There's so much good stuff there. I know I've said that a few times, but it's the truth. But until next time, I'll see you in the next video.